But what is the immediate economic fallout of Russia's attack on Ukraine? And how can governments and how can you prepare to survive this age of uncertainty? Let's find out. Joining me now is the former Governor of the Bank of Canada and now the Special Advisor at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt, Stephen Poloz. Sir, good to have you back on the program. Every time we talk, it seems there's another global crisis. So let's start with the immediate one. What is the immediate global economic impact of the war in Ukraine?
Well, look, I think this is another reminder, like we've seen over recent months, Evan, that we are surrounded by fragilities, whether they are economic ones, supply chain ones, financial ones, or political ones, or geopolitical ones. And I think we're in general not that well prepared for this kind of uncertainty. The natural inclination for an economist when something like this happens to get their pencil out, sharpen it, and start doing the arithmetic around what this can do, what that can do, and refine their forecasts. I think it's more to the point is this elevates uncertainty in so many dimensions. What's your natural tendency to do when you're really unsure of what's going to happen next? You freeze. And I think that's the most important element of this, is that people who make business decisions or economic decisions will stop and hold off and wait and see.
This last week, you saw Germany halted the Nord Stream 2 Baltic Sea gas pipeline from Russia that was supposed to get natural gas from Russia to Germany. Russia exports 70% of its natural gas to Germany and the EU. There's a threat now from Vladimir Putin that he could just turn it off to the EU, turn off the energy. What's your sense of where energy markets are going? Are people about to see a spike in energy prices?
Well, it looks like it. We've already seen a pretty significant spike in both gas prices and, of course, oil prices. This was happening just because of the economic recovery and underinvestment in the traditional energy sectors over the last 3-4 years. It seems like we've got a bit of a disconnect, or if you like, not a fully planned energy transition. We all know by 2050 we're going to be, back to net zero emissions somehow, but that path between here and there is quite ill-defined. And if you get ahead of yourself on one part of that track, then of course you can create a shortage that doesn't allow for the natural process of convergence. So of course, with when warfare, we know everybody gets hurt. Warfare, both sides. Economic warfare is no different. You start cutting this off, cutting that off. Well, it hurts both sides, but that doesn't mean they're going to last very long.
Last night, the West took the extraordinary step of booting certain Russian banks out of something called SWIFT. That's the international system of banking transactions. Most people may not even have heard of it. Can you explain, why that is so significant and what it would mean to kick Russia out of the SWIFT transaction financial system?
Yeah, well, the SWIFT system is our main international platform for moving money between counterparties that are registered in the SWIFT platform. Imagine if you were cut off from your bank, Evan, and you've over the next 2 to 4 weeks, you pay all your bills automatically, perhaps through your bank account, or you sit down on your iPad and you pay your bills and what have you. Well, to be cut off from your bank would be somehow finding another way, to do those things. The issue here is not, so if you cut them off, that's very inconvenient. It would be very inconvenient for you, but somehow you would get a different bank or you'd manage. And that's exactly, I think, what Russia would do. They would find another way to get things done, similar to what we saw with Iran. It's not a foolproof weapon.
Governor, just one last question about the war, and I want to move to your book, The Age of Uncertainty, although this is, I think the cycle of uncertainty is speeding up. Yeah. Does this war, inflation has been the big topic, as you know. There's lots of pressures, supply chain pressures and others on inflation. Does this crisis extend the inflationary crisis past where we are now and longer and higher?
I'm not sure that would be the case, Evan. I mean, of course, honestly, I don't know. Then that's the first thing. I must say that. But if it fuels a higher profile for oil and natural gas prices, then of course they will find their way into the top part of our CPI for the next few months. If those prices stayed roughly where they are, I'd expect inflation to actually decelerate. through the course of 22 because we're incorporating the big run up in prices that happened a year ago now into the base of our calculation. So in addition, I've read some good things from companies like Walmart, Canadian Tire, who are managing their supply chain issues quite well, did so actually during Christmas. So that's encouraging that people are solving the supply chain issues. If they don't keep getting worse, they won't keep adding to inflation.
Governor, one thing about a crisis is you start focusing narrowly on the immediate, on tomorrow. People are wondering what's going to happen in Ukraine and what's Russia going to do. I understand that. But part of what you've done in your book is you talk about the bigger picture, and a lot of folks are wondering how they can future-proof yourself. What are the, outside of the war, the pandemic, what are the 5 kind of key forces that you're watching for that people ought to keep an eye on, that whatever happens with this crisis, these remain the driving forces of uncertainty?
Yeah, these things are almost invisible, though not all of them, Evan. One is the most obvious to all of us: population aging. It's the old economist joke. A year from now, we're all going to be a year older. That's not exactly news, but the fact is, many of us, people like me, entered the workforce after the post-war baby boom, and now we're exiting the workforce. That's a pretty big phenomenon affecting the workforce, economic growth, interest rates, and of course, one of the ways it will manifest itself is a shortage of workers for companies. Technological progress is the other big force. With that comes growing income inequality. You've seen plenty of news about that lately. 70% or more of global citizens have lived in rising inequality over the past 10 years. That's a really significant thing. A lot of people begin to feel left out. They left behind. They blame globalization. They blame technology. Yes, it's all these things. And rising debt. Well, we've always talked about debt, you and I. But look what happened to debt during the pandemic. Governments borrowed over 20% of global GDP to manage the stresses of the pandemic. That's a big increase in debt. And finally, climate change, which is front and center right now. Those 5 things, many of them are personal, Evan. So when anything that bothers you personally, that becomes a political issue, because what matters to people matters to your politicians. And politicians are becoming increasingly polarized around these kinds of stresses. And this makes me skeptical that politics is going to manage to solve our problems for us.
Former Governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz. Sir, your book is well timed for a profoundly uncertain time in our lives. Thank you. I appreciate your time today.
It's my pleasure, Evan. Take care.